Sweet.
Is it beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? Oh my God. One of my former students from so sweet. So sweet. So people are saying the traffic is really bad getting here. So Leslie, would it be horrible if we kind of, people are saying the traffic is really bad, which is why, yeah, do you mind? Right. Very tiring. I thought they did.
They just say 5 to 7. And I think
Okay.
it's potentially.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I think you did change that.
Probably change that.
Yeah. I think just so people don't have to rush from it.
Yeah, because even the people like are the next two sold out. Yeah. But we're gonna have to fix the cost. I think the other thing is people are but I think we could increase it just so that we don't I read it tonight. Well, that's good. It just means that you're not. I don't know, I'm thinking about that.
That would be great.
Where do you watch it? Infomaterials.com/live. Our YouTube.
I think that. Can you monitor numbers on that kind of thing?
None of the people. I've got. If Lauren ever comes down, she's supposed to be putting it on the Instagram live. You're supposed to be here, yeah. That makes sense. If you don't mind, yeah. I don't know. Stream's going. It's on, the clicker is on. If you level down, just give me a nod.
Okay. Okay, I think Nancy on speaker. Is there someone at the door that can let people in?
Yeah, I believe Nate is there.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Is this everybody? They've done the lights and
I don't know.
Oh, yes, I just got the date. Oh, well, it's very interesting.
Sure, not for too long.
Alaska here as well. It's 18 people on that team.
It's based on kids. So they're kind of broke up. But the brain trust is here. But then he seems to be getting But it's maybe not, if you, I said, we're working towards that pre-fabricated version since the industrial revolution. It all looks like strip retail. Which is sort of
There's a sharp.
Is it blocking anything?
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so I think that.
Ladies.
Thank you. Yep.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, bear with me.
Sam, what do I have to do?
One moment. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Hi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is a really exciting evening for us, for everybody here, I'm sure. 19 months of no events. And, I mean, you guys know a lot of you have attended a lot of the events. It's become a real tradition for us, and it's been hard to not do them during this time, but obviously not hard to not do them during this time, so it's been just such a strange time. So thank you. I really appreciate it. We are so thrilled to be hosting these talks with the School of Architecture, Landscape Architecture at UBC. School is just such an amazing, what would you call it? I don't know, just a foundational part of our city, I feel, very much. And the people who are running it are really integral parts of the fabric of our city. And we have to be really thankful for that, that I believe we all think architecture is kind of important. So we have a few things here. An acknowledgement. We live and work gratefully on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. On another sober note, I would just like to acknowledge the passing of Andrew Gruff, one of our fine architects and members of our city, artistic and otherwise. I just don't know who's going to call it the Ponce Architects now he's not around. Somebody's going to have to pick up that mantle, because really we need him, or that voice. I would just like to mention that the next 2 Wednesdays, we are hosting 2 more talks with SALA. Next week is Serious Fun, the landscapes of Claude Cormier. And then the week after is another title that's just fantastic, like Iceberg Zombies in the Ultra Thin. Architecture and Capitalism in the 21st Century. There are spots available still remaining in both, so just a few. So if you want to attend, if you haven't already RSVP'd, please do. And it is with my great pleasure to introduce Ron to introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Nancy, and I will take a moment to acknowledge how amazing it is to see faces, not in little squares. So thank you so much. So I am Ron Kellett, and I'm director of SALA. And on behalf of our faculty, our students and staff, welcome to this conversation and presentation in recognition of the launch of a book by my faculty colleague, Leslie Van Duzer. I'll get out of the way in a minute, which was my clear instructions from Leslie. But first, I want to reciprocate to Nancy's generous welcome to us, to express our appreciation and gratitude for the generous hosting that she offers us at Inform. Nancy and colleagues have been tremendous supporters and hosts to us over the years, and thank you for yet another opportunity to meet and mingle with our friends and our colleagues in your beautiful store, and design community is very appreciative of all of that. Almost Not, The Architecture of Atelier Nishikata, the book we celebrate this evening, presents a story of a remarkable Tokyo-based architectural practice of partners Riko Nishio and Hirohito Ono. Within is a compelling, richly narrated and illustrated inside view of their work, and notably the creative processes and methods that give it form. Publisher Oro Editions casts the title as a hybrid between an architectural monograph and a musician's instruction book, with much to teach students of architecture and experienced architects alike. I know Leslie well enough that we can look forward to a delicious, insightful, and provocative unpacking of all of those threads that went into that description. So that we can get to that quickly, a very brief bio. Leslie Van Duzer is professor and former director of SALA at the University of British Columbia. She joined our faculty in 2010, and she has taught at dozens of schools of architecture in North America, Europe, and Japan. At SALA, she has taught undergraduate and graduate design studios, courses in design theory, and related topics and study abroad programs. She is an accomplished writer about design and architecture. Almost Not is her 6th book. Recent others include House Shuniacher, one of 8 monographs in the West Coast Modern House series that Leslie co-edited with SALA colleagues Sherry McKay and Chris McDonald. Previous others include studies of the ideas in architecture of Adolf Loos, Mies van der Rohe, and Rudolf Arnheim. And I can say no more, because Leslie's going to put all that together in a great way. So, welcome, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Ron, for the introduction, and thank you, Nancy and Niels, and to all your staff, Michael, who's been so patient with us. I add my voice to say that we're just so thrilled to be back here in your space, and appreciate you going a little bit out on a limb in these strange times to host us all again. So thank you very, very much. I think we should. Oops.
I got it.
Okay. So by now you've all seen the letter from Reiko Nishio that was left on your seat. And while her words made me very happy, obviously, I'm a little bit embarrassed to pass that out. But you see that Reiko and her partner Hiro really wanted to be here tonight. But in lieu of being able to travel from Tokyo, Reiko wanted to speak to you directly in this way. So I think it's worth me taking just a moment to explain how I came to meet them and how I first discovered their work. So some years ago, Reiko contacted me and wanted to come and study at UBC. She was to be an older student. She was familiar with my books on Loos and Mies, and we shared a love of their architecture. So while that plan didn't materialize, by pure coincidence, I was invited to teach in Tokyo for 1 term. The university asked me to identify a Japanese architect as my co-teacher, and I didn't know anyone, but then I realized that this would be a great opportunity to meet Reiko and get to know her. I still didn't know much at all about their work. She never talked about it. But late in the semester, I was finally invited to tour their projects, and I found them absolutely fascinating. So subsequently, Reiko spent 1 year as a fellow home-based at UBC, traveling out from here to study Mies's North American work. Her partner Hiro joined her, and we spent hours in conversation about architecture. And I have to say, those hours were the best conversations I've ever had with anyone about architecture. And so I think I can say we're kindred architecture spirits. So my interest in the work of Atelier Nishikata is directly related to my interest in the architecture of Los and Nice, and it may surprise you, also my interest in stage magic. What connects these strange bedfellows is what has been called techniques of imagination. Tonight, if you'll bear with me, I want to put the work of Atelier Nishikata in a broader context. So, as some of you know, my interest in magic dates back to my childhood, long before I had any awareness whatsoever of architecture. So my brother, pictured here, was intensely engaged with the world of magic for nearly 6 decades. He began as a performer, and as his assistant, I think I fulfilled every older brother's dream of suspending a little sister helplessly in midair and making me vanish altogether. So decades later, my brother and I joined forces again. Our second, less perilous collaboration began with the publication of Eric's first book, The 7 Basic Secrets of Illusion Design. So this book, which is a how-to manual for illusion designers, is based on his decades of experience designing and fabricating stage illusions. So it presents 7 general categories of methods and props, each category broken down into subcategories and amply illustrated with precedents. So in the process of editing his manuscript, we realized for the first time how productive it could be to draw parallels between our disciplines, magic and architecture. We found an abundance of architectural illusions that employed the same secrets, and we decided to co-teach several architecture studios and workshops. In one course, students used the magician's techniques to minimize the visual impact of tourist infrastructure at World Heritage sites, underscoring kind of the practical applications of illusion design. And in another class, students explored the poetic potential in the thickness of 2-sided walls. So I'm hoping that a brief tour through these 7 secrets will make these kind of mechanical comparisons clear. So in chapter 1, in his book, Hiding Behind, he introduces methods such as swinging doors, tilting panels, overlapping planes, which are all used to allow the magician or the assistant to remain hidden as they shift their position unseen. So this auto shop turned cafe and gallery in rural Japan uses a similar strategy, deploying swinging doors and freestanding planes to create private hidden areas within a large open space. In Stephen Hall and Vito Acconci's storefront for art and architecture, the panels of the facade can be configured and reconfigured to reveal and conceal the interior space of the gallery and its occupants. Hiding space describes the use of various techniques to minimize the apparent scale of a container. Among those techniques are segmentation and tapers. So here, the apparent random segmentation of the Wozoko housing facade by MVRDV disguises an utterly normal plan within. The secret behind Jean Nouvel's impossible paper-thin cantilevered roof, what magicians would call a discrepant event, is quite simply a tapered edge. Masking in magic is used to make something or someone disappear in plain sight. Black art is a kind of common technique. So assistants and props that are cloaked in black and aided by special lighting move around the stage invisibly, enabling spectacular illusions like this. Well, there are countless examples of buildings. This is like almost too easy, right? That's what we thought too. So there are countless examples of buildings minimizing their visual impact by using materials from the immediate context. So for example, anyone who's tried to find Herzog and de Meuron's winery with its facade of gabions containing local rocks knows it nearly vanishes in plain sight. Mirrors and many other things have also been used to mask a volume by reflecting its background, in this case, a public toilet by artist Monica Bonvicini. So mirrors and glass, next chapter, are used extensively in magic illusions to different ends. Sometimes they assist the appearance of a separation where there is no separation. Other times mirrors make an occupied space in a trick appear empty. They're also used to distort a person or an object, as in this case. So, the examples are endless, but Los, just to show you a few, Los's American Bar in Vienna uses mirrors at the top of the wall to reflect the ceiling and extend the space of a tiny bar into infinity. Mirrors and glass have been used to create complex, literal, and phenomenal spatial transparencies, such as in Mises' Barcelona Pavilion and AIM Architecture's Soho, China. Eric's chapter on trapdoors describes the secret mechanisms that support vanishes and appearances through horizontal and vertical planes. Here, Gary Chang's playful suitcase house riffs on the potential of the oft-neglected space beneath the floor. Fake forms in magic are used in magic to shuffle body parts or to create vanishes and levitations by convincing the audience that the assistant is present when and where they're actually not. So fake forms are everywhere in architecture. The difference between the exterior grandeur of Otto Wagner's Steinhof Church in Vienna and its much smaller, intimate interior, this is extreme. And while one senses the difference, that difference can't easily be reconciled. So the same is true for so many buildings with illegible exteriors. One couldn't imagine this architectural exuberance of Gary's DK Bank interior from its relatively tame exterior. The thing is, one can't be inside and outside a building at the same time. So these inside-out incongruities can create especially powerful effects. And finally, secret mechanical devices are required for levitations, here Lucille Ball, and for illusions that involve cutting an assistant in half. In buildings, of course, mechanical devices are always required, but rarely used so inventively as in Oma's Maison Bordeaux with its elevator floor, or on the skin of Albar towers, and now so many other buildings that respond to shifting light conditions. Okay, by the time my brother published this book, we were co-teaching the courses, I was well into my research on, with Kent Kleinman and Maria Rzadkowska on the architecture of Los and Mies. And I had long since come to the conclusion that bare all honesty in architecture had been highly overstated and overrated. The thing is, deceptive practices abound. To name just a few related to our studies, Los's tidy, buttoned-up facade of the Villa Muller masks the exuberant split-level round plan within. Not only does the plain white plaster face hide the materially rich interior, but the apertures that align on the exterior face into rooms on different floors. One of these inside-out incongruities that's extremely disturbing and unreconcilable when you go there. Los creates ambiguity between beams and columns and pilasters that serve a structural purpose and the fake forms that serve only to define the perimeter of a room or to carry pipes in their hollow shafts. Here, symmetrical doors serve to balance a space formally, but unexpectedly lead to very different conditions. A pantry in one case, a pantry and kitchen on the left, and a shallow closet on the right. And then, of course, there's Mies, which could go on forever, but Mies's so-called brick villas with their brick veneers concealing massive steel structures. Unsupported bricks hovering over a great expanse of glass is a physical impossibility, just like a magician's levitated assistant. It's actually ridiculous how many effective acts of deception like this take place in broad daylight. So, thank you, Greg, for the nice pictures. My interest in further studying deceptive practices as they apply to architecture stems from my desire to understand the conditions for bewilderment, that gentle and delightful upending of expectations that offers us the relief we also desperately need. We humans are so damn diligent about assigning rigid concepts to objects and organizing them into orderly categories or types. And the banal environments we inhabit are so good at mirroring and reinforcing our frameworks and all of our associated expectations. On a typical day, we just travel through our built environment without a second thought, turning corners, assuming there will be no obstructions ahead, opening doors, expecting them just to hinge on one edge. We generally consume our environment without pause, until, that is, we are made aware of a dissonance between our concept of an object, that is, our expectations and assumptions, and our actual sensory perception of it, our real experience. This moment of awakening, provoked by an unexpected incongruity, provides the relief we all seek. In his book, Humor, Terry Eagleton writes, "It's our own prized rationality we take a poke at. The person whose discomfort yields us pleasure is oneself." So while Eagleton is writing about incongruities in comedy, he could just as well be writing about architecture or magic. Now in magic, the climax of a trick is especially effective in creating bewilderment when it offers an unexpected, but importantly, logical conclusion. There's a marvelous magic trick that illustrates this well. It's a special version of the cutting a woman in half illusion. So, the magician's assistant climbs into a box. The lid is lowered, and she is sawn in half. The two halves are then separated. After some fanfare, the two halves are pushed back together, and the box is reopened. The audience expects the assistant to miraculously appear unscathed, but instead, two small girls appear in her place. After all, what could be more logical than two half-height humans emerging after a full-height human is cut in half? So my new book, which is the reason we're here, Almost Not, The Architecture of Atelier Nishikata, was, as Ron mentioned, conceived as a hybrid magic manual and architecture monograph. So the expression almost not describes any situation where a proposition is made, but then not fulfilled in an expected way. It's almost what you expected, but then not. So my introductory essay in the book describes three effects, all related to altering our sense of time: delay, déjà vu, detour. And each has a technique that's associated with it. And now at last, I would like to introduce you to the enigmatic work of these two masters of dissonance, Reiko Nisho and Hirohito Ono. So So in the first of their 4 project, and they have one project called 4 Episodes. In the first episode, The White Room, the architects placed a column in the almost, but not quite, center of the room. As with so many aspects of this very complex space, there's a strong dialogue between the floorboards, which mark the geometric center of the space, and the column, which is centered only on one axis. While the column divides the space productively and indeed serves a structural purpose, we also notice a very peculiar column has 2 thin doors in it on opposite sides. It's not quite like any column we've ever seen before. If we open one door, the column transforms into a broom closet, or a column broom closet. If we open both doors, we have a column window, a new type. If we're slender enough to pass through, which the inhabitants are, and I'm not, the column window becomes a column threshold. Our common understanding of a column has slipped, or in this case, expanded. On 2 opposite sides of the White Room, there are what appear to be 2 matching closets, each with 2 doors similar to the doors in the column. When we open the first set of double doors, we find a glazed door that leads to the garden. But when we open the identical double door on the second closet across the room, expecting to find clothes hanging, we find only a shallow, empty space. There's a discrepancy between what we know about closets based on years of experience with them and what we are encountering here, but we have no other name for this space. Until that is, we discover that the back panel of this strange, empty space slides to one side, revealing a staircase beyond. Now we realize we're experiencing firsthand a type that we knew only from fiction, that is, the closet threshold. In Moto wa Shitsu, the second episode, the architects renovated a square traditional Japanese room that was no longer practical for the inhabitants. They renovated it into 2 spaces by dividing it in half with what they called a wall column. The slight shift in the wall creates a narrow slot. This can be open for passage or closed for privacy. The result is each side of the wall has 2 areas of slightly different widths separated by a circulation path. But the architect's final move is so counterintuitive but also brilliant. They created 2 gabled ceilings, not running the length of the spaces as one would expect, but rather perpendicular to them. So one square room was divided in 2, now divided again by a rotated ceiling, creating 4 discrete spaces from 1. In the diamond room, the architects cleverly challenge our convention about hallways. They replaced them entirely with a 1 meter square vestibule rotated 45 degrees to the rest of the plan. This tiny, tiny room has 4 identical elevations, each comprised solely of 2 slender doors we have seen before in the other episodes. The doors open into 4 distinct and notably unequal spaces: an entry, study, a bathroom, a walk-in closet, and the kitchen and main living space. In Mary Goes Round, this is a renovation of a classic 4-room apartment in Tokyo. With one single move, the architects create remarkable spatial complexity. As they are prone to do, they put a column in the middle of the space, but this time not at the intersection, not in one room, but at the intersection of the 4 rooms. They then altered the adjoining walls minimally, creating new sliding panels that are reminiscent of a traditional Japanese house. So this diagram shows the multiplication of possible spaces made available with such a simple move, such a brilliant move. So now we have a taste of what happens to standard building components in the hands of Atelier Nishikata. And on occasion, they defamiliarize materials as well. So here, for example, we see the front facade of their house in Awaji, which is clad with dislocated roofing paper. Now, House in Awaji was built on a thin infill site in Tokyo with the primary view facing the park across the street. And given this extremely constrained site, sandwiched on two sides by buildings just inches away, surely most architects would have taken in as much light and view as possible from the front facade, right? Who wouldn't? Well, these architects are no ordinary architects, and they intentionally required us to shift our perspective, in this case quite literally, turning our attention to picture windows that frame the electrical conduits on the neighboring walls. In doing so, they invite us to reconsider what constitutes a picture window and a worthy view. So in the following examples of their work, dissonance creates a very subtle and complex experience. So bear with me as I try to explain their strategies. In this same house in Awaji, the architects divided 4 floors into 8 small rooms. Again, not super intuitive. Into 8 small rooms separated by a single run stair that had different configurations. That's important. The irregular stairs result in each of the 8 spaces being on slightly different level. The stair variation is very subtle, but it is critical because it is intended to bias our movement toward the 4 spaces in the house that they have designated as public. In designating each of the 8 rooms as either public or private, the architects already challenged our conventions about how to classify a program. The bathroom, for example, is deemed public because guests would be welcome there. So in this infill house, there's no front and back logic, as you would expect. There's no front-back logic to the distribution of program. For example, what we might expect, a determination that lesser rooms would be located in the smaller spaces facing the rear light well. Oh, the 4 public rooms for guests zigzag from the front to the back of the house, interweaving likewise with the 4 private rooms that do the same. The direction of the vaults and the determination about which walls should cant are determined by the public-private designations. Room sizes, vault diameter, shape of window, their placement, all of that, the size of the plywood panels are all determined by related geometries. So each layer of rules has an internal logic, but the logics don't always result in alignments, as we have come to expect or hope for. Just as visitors begin to try to piece the logics together, which is difficult enough, the architects introduce exceptions to their rules. The net effect of the many layered and misaligned rules, and add to that the exceptions to those rules, is confounding, bewildering, to say the least. The result is an experience that's labyrinthine. It's impossible to map this building in one's mind. The architects have succeeded in their ambition to transcend the physical limits of this small building. And finally, for their most recent project, Frame, the architects were asked to join 2 penthouse apartments with different plans and orientations. Their inspiration came from Ozu's film, Tokyo Story, and the director's use of repetition of almost the same but not quite the same, frames and configurations of actors within them. So in the movie, as the elderly parents travel to visit their grown children in different cities, we see this same scene repeated over and again with slight variations. So the architects mined the floor plan of the west-facing unit and excavated what they call frame one, a rectangle that incorporates several rooms. They then rotated that frame 90 degrees and superimposed it on the second apartment, establishing frame two. Remarkably, as you can see, I think this is just like almost a miracle, as you can see from the interior elevations, within each frame, there is a nearly identical condition of door frames and pilasters. Given how different the floor plans were, it's quite amazing. So moving from frame one into frame two, beyond there, creates a déjà vu, sense of déjà vu. But as we all know, déjà vu is a false memory. When we pass through any two identical paired doorways within frame one and two, when we match them up, we encounter entirely different spaces beyond the frame, different programs, solar orientations, and views. We are, again, bewildered by these unexpected incongruities. So Paul McGee, a leading expert on laughter, helpfully describes several sources of incongruity, again, from the world of comedy, which is quite helpful. A sudden shift of perspective, an unexpected slippage of meaning, an arresting dissonance or discrepancy, a momentary defamiliarizing of the familiar. Now, I want to suggest that these incongruities are very often the result of moving something from one category or type to another. For example, in telling this joke, why did it get so hot in the baseball stadium after the game? All the fans left. The comedian exploits the fact that the word fans has multiple meanings and therefore can be placed in at least two categories. One of those we'll call audience types, the other one's cooling devices, two categories that don't have anything to do with one another. The joke depends on having the ability to mentally jump categories, an enviable gift that's bestowed upon punsters. So we know in magic as well that essentially all illusions function by moving something from one category to another. When a magician performs a levitation, for example, they've moved the assistant from the category of gravity-bound things to the category of floating things, putting the assistant in the good company of clouds and dandelion fluff. Now, much has been written about categories, and I'm no expert in category theory, but let me just cherry pick a few relevant ideas. In the early 1970s, Eleanor Roche, who's a professor of cognitive psychology at Berkeley, proposed an extremely influential new theory called the prototype theory of categories that upended the long reign of the classical theory of categories, which dated back to Plato and Aristotle. So the long-standing classical theory stated that members of a category must meet necessary and sufficient conditions. Category boundaries are clear. A member is either in the category, it's either a chair or it ain't a chair. An entity can only belong to one category, and all members of a category have the same status. Well, these conditions sound pretty odd and limiting to us, and that's not surprising because for the last 50 years, Roche's prototype theory has prevailed, and we've grown up with that without even knowing it. So her theory counters by stating members of a category can have different status, and some are more central than others. The prototype of a category might be an average member, maybe the most frequent, have the most common features, etc. And members of a category share family resemblance. Categories are defined by typical features. So Roche aligned her theory with Wittgenstein's theory of family resemblances, which states that within any category, and he famously uses the example of chairs, but since we're here in Inform, I think we should use chairs, or he uses games, I'm sorry, we'll use chairs. There are no necessary and sufficient conditions for membership. Categories are defined by typical features like forelegs, seat and backrest, portability. In addition to having members of a category or type that are more central than others, more prototypical, Roche describes categories themselves as having this kind of hierarchy. So from the top to the bottom, superordinate, basic level, and subordinate. So superordinate categories like furniture, they're too general. They're not useful for us because we can't actually get an image of furniture. It's a little bit like saying transit. It's too broad. And subordinate categories are too specific. They're like, the Sacco chair. It's just too specific. But basic level categories are fertile playground, and that's where we want to operate. Those are the most interesting and important for us. Basic level categories are, to use Latvi Zada's term, fuzzy sets, and they have open borders. So one final critical distinction between the classic theory or classical theory and the prototype theory is that formerly it was believed that we categorize things based on what they have in common. That's back to the kind of necessary and sufficient conditions. So all of these would be understood as stairs. But the prototype theory posits something very important, and that is that human capacities play a role in categorization. Our perception plays a role. Categories are not defined only by properties inherent to their members, but also by our embodied experiences with them and our perceptions of them. So depending on how you choose to use that folded surface, you may see that and describe that in a very different way. So for those of you who, like me, are interested in the evolution of types and sources of invention in our field, perhaps this quote from Raphael Moneo's seminal text on typology will convince you that progress in our discipline has always depended on the category-defying antics of the tricksters who work among us. So I'm almost finished here. Let's quickly explore how keeping the boundaries of categories and types fuzzy allows tricksters in different arts to be inventive. While there are many possible techniques at their disposal, some of those mentioned by Moneo in the previous passage, let's look at for a change of scale, material, quantity, and context. So scale, upending our assumptions about the standard dimensions of people and things allows a magician to hide an assistant in an impossibly small box, or it allows an artist to transform a cheap household object into a monument. The ability to see the potential in jumping scales allows the designer and the architect to use metaphors in the design of the French fry chair or the matchbox cabin. Our expectations about materials come about from direct physical engagement. So when Tobias Wong used an expensive and fragile alto vase as formwork for a concrete doorstop, we experienced that new object viscerally. Gary's ability to see luxury furniture in a pile of discarded cardboard, or for the students at Rural Studio to see in a flat carpet square a three-dimensional building block, requires great mental dexterity. When something we expect to find in a limited quantity is multiplied, it takes on an entirely different presence and function. So in the case of Wolfgang Leib's pollen-covered gallery floors, it's nearly impossible for a viewer to believe what their eyes behold. In context, moving something associated with one context, say a men's bathroom, to another, an art gallery, has the potential to create an incongruity with radical implications. In this case of Duchamp's fountain, nothing less than a new type of art. And in conclusion, I think Duchamp said it so well. I was only trying to create a new idea for an object which everybody thought they already knew. Everything can be something else, and that's what I want to prove. Thank you very much. I don't want to keep you too long, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
So much fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. I can't wait to read the whole book, because some of the plans, I just can't wait to figure them out. It is like a little puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, their work looks really simple. It's also, I think, interesting because it's super low budget, super low budget. So it has a lot, I think, to teach us. And by layering all these, in most of their rooms, there are layers upon layers of rule sets. And that creates a spatial complexity, even though, you know, the plans and the photos look very simple. But you feel it. I like to describe the feeling of being in some of their spaces as being caught in the middle of a dinner party where there's if you lean this way, you can kind of get part of that conversation. If you lean that way, you get part of another rule set or conversation, and you're like between them all in a very kind of exciting and heightened state, I found. So I think that's a wonderful lesson for us, that architecture can be so simple. I should mention that they have, in 20 years, built 4 projects. So they're very slow. And that's how they can think so deeply about all their projects. I still haven't figured out how they support themselves, but never mind, they do. So,
Thank you so much.
thank you all very much for coming today.
Books are for sale.
Oh,
and
yes.
we've got a beautiful little table set up, Charlotte Crayon, with a chair, and for lessons.